Hey, everybody, welcome back to Build It with Tim. This week's episode, we've got a new camera angle, we've got a new haircut, and we've got a new feature to talk about. Okay, this is saving values to local storage and how do I use this feature? Okay, so this feature has actually it's been around for a couple months now, but I don't see it used that often. And I kept asking myself why, and I feel like maybe it's because it's not understood super well. So I wanted to go over that today and discuss a couple different use cases. When we're talking about saving values to local storage, this is a browser thing. So the values that we can save from our application into the browser storage or local storage can be utilized in many different ways. All right. So if you are capable with custom code like JavaScript or something, then you can actually extract those values from local storage. You can do a lot of neat things with them. Okay. But what we're going to be doing is we're going to be doing all native stuff inside of the builder today. Okay. So this is going to be um, a couple different examples of maybe an issue that you're having and how we could solve that issue using local storage and some unique ways to build out certain features using this option. So as usual, I will show you what this looks like when we're done, and then we have quite a bit to talk about before we actually get into the builder. All right, let's head over to the finished app now and check that out. All right, so here's our finished example, and this is kind of a two-part example here. They're both unique from each other or individual from each other, but they can work together. So here we have this kind of complex page structure where we're going multiple levels um, down from where we started. So we're starting at the company's page and we can view the company details, see all the connected jobs, and then on job details, we can add new tasks. Now, by default, when I add a task in this form, we're going to set the job connection, but we don't have a great way of setting the company connection unless we actually look at the what company is connected to the job that we are connecting to, or we save values to local storage. And what I've done in the background here, which I'll show you once we get back to the builder, is set up the local storage option. So if we do test task one, you can see we're setting that value of company. Again, there's some stuff happening behind the scenes here. And then if we do test task two, we have that company connection. Now, where that's coming from is actually from a value that we saved inside of local storage. So we've saved this record ID and we've saved it into local storage, and then we are using that inside of the task form. Okay, now that we have a bunch of tasks created, what if you want to assign these tasks to users using action links? So I have another value that I've just saved from this user detail component. And again, I've saved that user ID or record ID. And just by clicking this action link now, I can assign a task directly to a user and do that by setting the connection using the value from local storage. Okay, so that's what we're going to end up building out today. There's a lot to talk about first, so let's head into, I guess we're done here. Let's go talk about it and figure it all out together, okay? Okay, so as you saw in that finished application or finished example, is we're dealing with record IDs and setting connections, and we're utilizing local storage to help us with that particular functionality. But what I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about was connections themselves, how they work, and our page structures that we are familiar with inside of Tadabase. Okay, so to start out with connections, something that comes up quite a bit that can be difficult to kind of explain sometimes via text, and I thought maybe it would be helpful to show you a little diagram, is how connections are actually made and what is the display value that we're seeing. Okay, so the common question that I get asked is, I'm trying to set a connection using a my company's name, or I'm trying to set a connection using a user's email address. Okay, what we're actually talking about there, the email address or the company name, is the display value. Okay, how connections are made is shown like this. Okay, imagine we have two different tables. We have customer table, we have a company table. Okay, and inside of the customer table, we have customer records. Now, each record is made up of multiple parts, those parts being the fields themselves. Now, the fields are all configurable, as you can see inside the builder, where you can create whatever fields you want. If you want customer name, email, phone, address, whatever it is from those list of field options, that's totally fine. One of the fields that you can select, of course, is a connection field. And when we configure that connection field, we are telling Tadabase what table um, the connected records are going to live in. Okay, but when we are actually setting a connection from one record to another, so in this case, a customer to a company, a customer belongs to a company, it is connected to that company. Connections are always going to be made using a record ID. Now, the record ID is not something that Tadabase explicitly puts in front of you, but it is there kind of lingering around the builder, most notably in the URLs of both the builder and the live application. You may have also noticed that you see record ID shown inside of rules, like table rules, form rules, action link rules, things like that. You'll see table ID, record ID listed in parentheses. Now, those are fields that exist, but they're kind of hidden from view until we actually need to reference them. Okay, so connections are made using record IDs. So customer A connects to company A, and that connection will always 100% of the time be made using the record IDs from those particular records. Now, when we select the display value, say, what value do I want to choose in order to display the actual connection inside of the connection field, right? Because the connection field itself wouldn't be all that useful to your users if the connection that was made between records was shown as the record ID. You would not know who the company is or what the company is just by the record ID itself, right? It's just a random string of numbers and letters. So we allow you choosing a display value so that you can clearly identify which record is actually being connected to. Okay, so I hope this or this diagram kind of helps explain that. The record IDs are always used in connections, and then we choose a display value in order to properly and clearly identify what company is actually connected to that customer record. Okay, so the next part I wanted to talk about was pages. Okay, so the page structure is very specific. Um, when we are working inside of the page builder and then ultimately the live application. So if we take a look at my fake address bar up here in blue, we have your actual domain of your application, you have your app name, and then your page name. So this is what we would refer to as a parent page. And I'm going to come back to this this concept in a minute about parents, child's, or children, stuff like that in a minute, but let me just get through this. Okay, so we have the domain, app name, page name. Okay, so this is, let's say we were showing companies. Our page name was companies, and then when we build out that page, we can select a data table in order to show records from a particular data table. So we'd show all of the companies, right? Now, when you click on a details button or a details link to go to a details page, what that's actually doing is taking the record ID of the record that you clicked the button on. So if this was company A, B, and C, if we click on the details button for company C, that takes us to the details page, and you're going to notice that the URL changes. We still have the same, everything in front at the beginning is still the same, where we have the domain, the app name, the page name, the name of the details page, and then we have this dynamic value being the record ID. So if we clicked on company B, if we clicked on company B, then the record ID shown at the end of the URL would be for company B. If we click on company C, then the record ID at the end of the URL is going to be for company C. Okay, these are all unique values here, but they are dynamic in the URL depending on what record is clicked on. All right, so now on this details page, right, the detail component mocked up here is showing us details of that specific record that we selected. So this is only going to show details about company C or whichever record ID is shown up here in the URL. Now, when we add additional components to this page, like connected tables or related tables, all that is doing is showing us records that are connected using that same record ID. So thinking about the the image from above with this diagram here, we're talking about the two record IDs. Okay, so this becomes important with browser storage, and let's jump over to the builder now and get going with that. All right, so here we are inside of our little sample application, and I've created a couple tables: companies, jobs, and tasks. I think this is kind of a familiar concept to a lot of people, a lot of people's use cases, in terms of not only like actual hierarchy in how these tables are connected, but obviously like a common use case. Okay, so we have companies. This is like our most parent object, right? All jobs are going to connect to a company. All tasks are going to connect to jobs. So that's what I mean by actual hierarchy. I think it makes the most sense. Then we have jobs, which just like I said, the job has a name. It might have a due date, a status field. It doesn't really matter right now. It has a connection to the company. Okay, and then we have tasks, which connect to jobs, connect to companies, and also connect to users. All right, so I mentioned kind of like this parent-child relationship. Um, just I mentioned it briefly when we were going through those diagrams and stuff, but the way that these connections are all set up, like we have these clearly defined like parent-child relationships where a job is a child to a company and a task is a child to a job. Um, Obviously, companies and jobs at that point can both be parents to different tables, but when we piece it all together and we look at tasks, we have the tasks connect to a job, tasks also connect to a company. When we're looking at like the page side, the way that the page structure is going to kind of flow and work depending on how you build it is you can have companies be like a direct parent from a task, but there are other use cases where the company might end up being like a grandparent. Okay, so we've kind of gone 3 levels down or 3 levels up, depending on how you look at it, and maybe that'll make more sense in the page builder when we do this. Okay, so just as a little note here, we always recommend that you don't really build pages that go more than one indentation deep. So here you have one indent, two indent, right? So we're nesting these pages in there. Once we get to this page, we start to lose some of the referenceable data from the parent page, being companies, right? But we can use this local storage thing to help us out, and that's what we're going to do here. Okay, so let's just walk through this workflow quickly. A user is going to go to a page that shows all the companies. They're going to click on the details for that particular company. They're going to end on the company details page where now they can see all of the connected jobs. Now they're going to be able to click on job details and then view all the connected tasks. All right, so let me just put some forms on these pages so that we can add some data here. All right, so we have our companies where we can add new, we have jobs where we can add new jobs. And this, I wanted to show you the like me actually putting these forms on here because of the visible options that we have when we're choosing a data source. So on this, we can edit this page as company, or we can add a new job connected to this company. So we're going to add this because it's going to have that pre-selected connection to the company. And then we'll go to the or job details page where we can do the same thing with tasks. Now, if you notice, we can add a task connected directly to this job, or we can add, no, I'm sorry, that's right. Okay, so sorry, I got myself confused there for a second. So if we go back and think about the data structure that we had, where tasks do have a direct connection to company, but the way we've structured our pages, we leave the company's page, we go to company details where we're looking at jobs, and then we go to job details. And if you notice the data source options that I have here, I can add a new task to connect to the job, but I can't add a task that connects to the company. Like, sure, in the actual workflow that the user is experiencing, they went to the company's page first, they selected a company, but inside the builder, we've lost that reference at this point. So the only option that we really have is adding a new task connected to this job. So if I do this and save it, what's going to happen when now that we actually do this, and let me just populate some data here, and then we'll come back and do this. Okay. Sorry for that. So here we are back at this page here. So I went back up to the top all the way to companies. So we have this company that we're looking at, company A. We can go to the company details and see all the jobs. So here we have a job called record video for company A. And then when we go into the details of that job, we submitted a new task. Um, and it connects to the job, but it doesn't connect to the company. Okay, so there are some ways that we could like actually do this without local storage, and we can do that inside of record rules if we really wanted to, where we can set the company to the connected value of the jobs company. Okay, or what we can do is rather than building a whole bunch of rules, we can just save the value somewhere and use it whenever we want so that we don't have to build in a bunch of different rules. Okay, and the reason that this is important to consider as an option is because what we're looking at here is an incredibly simple data structure, incredibly simple page structure. When you have large complex applications, you may already have 5 record rules running and a couple table rules running. And the idea of adding another one, maybe not such a great idea. Okay, this can have some negative consequences in terms of processing time and things like that. So what we can do with local storage, I know I've been talking a lot and I should finally actually show you, is if we add some fields to our tables. Okay, and we're going to do that now. We're going to add some fields to populate with record IDs. So I'll do this on each table that I want to save these record IDs on. Where am I going? Here I am. Okay. Record ID. Once we have all those fields created, then you can populate those fields with the record ID any number of ways. Really, you could use any type of rule. So if this was a table rule, a form rule, an action link rule, I did this using table rules, where we're just setting the value of the record ID text field to the record value of record ID. Okay, and you can see now that those are all populated. So again, we're going to reference what we talked about at the beginning of this video is when we want to set a connection, we have to set it using a record ID. Now we can feed a connection field a text value of a record ID as long as it actually is a valid record ID. So back in our company details page, I'm sorry, job details page, where we are now missing the connection from the task to the actual company from that we started on, what we can do is we can add this record ID to a detail component. And the reason we're doing this in the detail component is because that's where we can save values to local storage. So if we click on any field inside of a detail component, then we can choose this option to save a value to local storage. Okay, and then we have the ability to set our own variable. So we'll call this company ID. Let's let's put this underneath the company field. Okay, and then what we can do with this is we can actually use that value inside of rules. So Tadabase will, once we actually create the rule inside of a form or an action link, you can see we can say update this record, and we can set the company to a browser local or session storage to, and then we just repeat our variable company ID, and that will actually when we land on this page, and it's different for every user. So if I start out on company A and you start your workflow on company B, then your local storage is going to save company B, mine's going to save company A. And every time you go back to the top of that workflow, so you select a new company, it's going to overwrite the previous value with the newest value. Okay, so once that value has been logged, when you submit the form, we're looking for that particular variable name inside a local storage, and then we're extracting the value that we've saved and inserting it into the form rule. Okay, so here's what this looks like when we start over now. Okay, company A. And actually, let me open up my developer inspector here so that we can see our actual our values being saved. And you can find this, you can right click and do developer options and hit inspect, and then you're going to go to the application tab, and then local storage, okay, or session storage, whichever one you are saving it to. So we can see here's the actual application that we're looking at now, the URL. And when we get to that job details page, we should, if we refresh this, have these particular values saved. Now, some of them, job, I think I neglected to tell you this, but I actually set one up on here. So the job is saving the job name. Let's get rid of that one. And company, this is the actual connection field. And I wanted to explain to you why we had to save the record ID to a text field, is that the actual connection field, right, again, because we have a record ID, we have a display value that's been chosen. When we output that in something like this, it actually appears as an object field. Okay, it has multiple values inside of it rather than just one. So what we had to do is actually go, I'll turn this one off as well. We saved that record ID, so we're extracting the only value that we actually want, which is the record ID. Okay, so company ID is our variable. We'll go back to here. Let's refresh. And here's our only value that's here now. So if I add a new task, you can see the previous task that we added did not have a connection to the company. But as soon as I hit save, it's going to run that record rule. It's going to go grab this value, and it's going to save that connection as company A. Okay, very cool stuff. What we can do next is in the same kind of this concept of companies, tasks, jobs, users, and stuff, is let's say we have a list of tasks that we want to assign to somebody using an action link. Okay, so inside of an action link, there is no way to say, set the connection to whatever user I'm currently looking at on a details page, but we can use the local storage in the same way. Okay, so once we get to our user detail page, as long as our record ID is visible on the detail component, and just as a side note, if you don't want to show the record ID, you can always use display rules to hide it. So we can say if well, in this case for users, the email will never be blank. So if we say the email is not blank, then hide the record ID field, and that's it. Now it will be gone from the detail component, but it's still usable because it's just hidden. Okay, so on the left-hand side of this page, we're going to have a whole bunch of tasks that are unassigned, and then we can click an action link to assign that particular task to a user. So let's go into our detail component, make sure that we're saving this to local storage. So we'll say user ID. And then in this list of tasks, we will create an action link. And in our rule, we can use the same thing that we did with the form rules. So we can say update this record and set the user to the local storage value of user ID or whatever variable you chose. Okay, now I should also point out that this table on the left is filtered where user is blank. And on the table on the right, this is tasks that are assigned to this particular user. So records connected to this user. All right, so let's go check out this page. We'll open this up as well, and you can see that value is actually still there. So the next time I go to that company page, like I could even save a value and then go 3 pages away into a totally different part of the application and still have that value saved. Okay, so this is a great way to like save variables, save values, navigate anywhere else in the application and still be able to pull in a value that we've saved already. So if I go into my user, okay, here's 3 tasks that are not assigned. You can see we've just logged that particular user ID. Okay, and now if I click assign to user, we've just assigned all 3. And then if I refresh this table, you'll see they are now connected to this user. All right, so this ability to do local storage and save things and extract that value at any time during a user's experience in your application can be hugely beneficial. Okay, now this whole thing with connections, the reason I chose this particular example is because it comes up a lot. Okay, but I realize that there's a little bit of extra work involved by creating those record ID fields and creating the rules to actually save the record IDs to those record ID fields, right? And then you have to put them on the detail component and maybe hide it. There's a little bit of extra work involved, but I think that the benefits outweigh the extra work significantly. Okay, so uh, I feel like I end most videos with this: is that like I've shown you an example of something, and then I leave it up to your creativity and your ingenuity to actually really put this to the test and build this out in really cool ways. So I think it's valid here too. I think a lot of people could probably find some really unique and awesome and powerful use cases for this. And I hope that this at least gave you a better understanding of how to use the feature itself, how to do things specifically with record IDs and connections in kind of an unorthodox way, and also a better understanding of connections and page structures in general. Okay, so that's it for this week, and I'll see you next week. I hope you all enjoyed it. Have a great day. Bye bye.